and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in terms of what is going on in the political situation of the country, and unfortunately, especially in the aftermath of yet another U-turn by the PTI chairman and the former Prime Minister, in which he has spoken about the US-led conspiracy, the so-called US-led conspiracy that he has been building the foundation of his party's narrative on for quite some time now. And the fact that now in his interview to the Financial Times, he says that he has put it behind him and that he no longer blames the US for it. This, of course, points to question a lot in terms of what has been said by the PTI leadership and the chairman himself, something that has been pointed by the Information Minister, the Prime Minister and many other political leaders, talking about how this is not something that you can just take away now after talking about this for so many months, building your narrative on this basis, getting support from your voters because of such a sentiment that was put forward by your leadership. And then, of course, in terms of the kind of political gains that the party enjoyed because of this narrative at the cost of the diplomatic relations with the US, that, of course, is a huge consequence. However, we now see that the previous slogans of US-led conspiracy, absolutely not, or imported government seem to be meaningless in terms of what Khan has now pointed out, saying that this is behind him. So if all of this is in fact behind him, where does the narrative stand? The PTI that has been pointing this out for quite some time, what sort of an agenda or narrative do they have now, and what will they be playing with, since of course this is something that was part of their audio leak as well and quite apparent in terms of what was done. So this is going to be the focus of our segment today, and we're going to take a look at the kind of responsibility the political leadership has in terms of the national interest and of course taking into consideration such important diplomatic relations. After this, we're going to be taking a look at the end at another very important aspect, considering what Pakistan has been going through for quite some time with reference to the economic conditions and also the potential impact of climate change, and as a result of which we've seen the devastating floods earlier this year, something that of course we're still dealing with and perhaps we'll be dealing with for many years to come. There is of course a lot of conversation going on in terms of climate change justice, something that Pakistan reiterated right after these floods as well at every platform. And because of such conversations, we saw that in the recent COP27, in which the Prime Minister also took part, this particular loss and damage issue and the financial infrastructure for countries who are going to be potentially at the forefront of such climate change disasters needs to be part of the conversation, was actually on the agenda. And so because of this small victory, we now have come to another one in which Pakistan and 6 other nations facing climate risks, which have been termed as pathfinder countries, will be the first recipients of what has been termed as Global Shield funding. And this was announced at the COP27 summit in Egypt just yesterday. And through this Global Shield, these countries will be supported for financial support even prior to such climate risks and such disasters. And sort of infrastructure is going to be in place to help these countries be able to deal with climate disasters much more efficient way, and of course this support is much needed in terms of the loss and damage. So we're going to take a closer look at what this means, how exactly will this infrastructure be developed, and since of course there have been calls of putting this into immediate effect after the COP27, what can we see in terms of the pace at which we need to see this functioning? That is going to be the focus, of course, at our second segment today. For this and more, as always, I've been joined in the studios by senior analyst Farooq Patafi and Raja Faisal. And we've also been joined online by our guest, Dr. Niaz Murtaza, who's a political analyst, and Mr. Javed Jadoon, also a senior analyst. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being a part of the debate once again. Let me start with you, Dr. Niaz, considering, of course, that this has been part of the PTI's narrative for quite some time. We can understand that the foundation of where the PTI stands right now in terms of its popularity, in terms of what they have claimed they are fighting for, is now at a question mark. And so we see that because of these arguments that have been put forward, the entire statement by Mr. Imran Khan to the Financial Times disintegrates the whole argument that has been built up. Even so, we see that perhaps even in the past, considering the audio leaks or denial by the National Security Committee or even the US wasn't something that was in fact impacting the way that the PTI supporters were taking in this stance. Now that Mr. Imran Khan himself have said something like this, do you think that this is going to have at least some sort of an impact or some sort of an accountability from PTI's own supporters in terms of why this is now being put behind and how this now puts into question everything else that is being said about institutions or the incumbent government?
Well, the thing with these political statements and interviews is that, politicians deliberately, keep it very vague. And it's always possible to, infer different meanings from it. And that's
Hmm.
what is already happening on social media, Twitter, etc. The way PTI supporters are interpreting it is that, Mr. Imran Khan is just being very magnanimous. He's decided to put it behind him. He wants to move on and so on. They are saying it does not mean that, his original charges were wrong or that he should not have made them. So in that way, it's a never-ending saga that will continue, and the question marks will continue to hover around this question. In fact, if you look at it rationally, there were never any question marks. From day one, this was a dead argument because there was no evidence to back the fact that there was ever any US involvement or a conspiracy. There was no evidence ever given by the PTI that the US was directly involved. I mean, the way it was pitched that first of all they said that there is a letter. Later on, it turned out no, it wasn't a letter. It was a cipher sent by our own diplomat who was just reporting the US would may find it very difficult to work with the Pakistani government if the vote of no confidence failed. There was never any threat given to even the ambassador that the US will intervene. So, there's just so much evidence if anybody wants to look at it rationally. But then the fact is that, there are so many people who are not willing to look at it rationally. Then there was, the audio leaks that were another giveaway, and now there is this. But then, I don't think it's going to make any difference. And then the fact is that all of this was said for a foreign audience, to the Financial Times, in the hope that, people in Pakistan may not read it, but obviously everything news travels. So, that was the real purpose to, amend ways with the US and with the international audience rather than,
Hmm.
the Pakistani audience. The Pakistani audience, the same argument will continue: imported government, conspiracy, and so on.
Absolutely. Javed Saab, considering, of course, that this is, of course, something that has been pointed out by various political leaders as well, that the entire narrative, of course, benefited PTI, and there were a lot of political gains coming in from this at the cost, of course, of diplomatic relations with the US, a very important relationship, and then, of course, Pakistan's own national interests as well. And this is perhaps even long lasting and perhaps more so than just about Mr. Khan. And because of that, we, of course, need to question how our political leaders are functioning and what sort of accountability exists. If the personal political gains of a party or a leader are more important than the country's, then of course we need to put into question whether or not we need to see such leaders coming forward. And if so, how do we make this something that is not repeated? Because of course it's not only Mr. Imran Khan who has played on an anti-US sentiments. There have been many others in the past.
Thank you very much, Sana. I think we need to understand that Imran Khan, when he was ousted from power, he didn't believe that people would come out and support him the way people supported during the very initial days. I think Imran Khan believed that he need to have kind of a narrative which will be beneficial for his party to bounce back, because in the last 6 months or so during his rule, he was touching the lowest ebb of unpopularity because of the price hike, inflation, and so many other blunders he committed because of a first timer. The cabinet, I think there were many commentators were talking about the level of their competency and their capacity, etc. So I think all of a sudden he decided to go for some kind of a narrative, and narrative was to involve the United States of America in a kind of a conspiracy theory which helped topple his government. And like any other leader in the developing world, I think America is a superpower, is a reality, and no world leader, no rather no leader of the developing world, whether in opposition or the government, could afford to have hostile relations with Washington. So ultimately, what he said was a realpolitik, because he believes that he can't go on confronting Washington and then dream to come back into power as well. Because in the international power game, every developing nation looks towards, if they believe that there's a path to power corridors, it maybe it goes through Washington's blessing. I mean, this is the kind of a perception. I don't know to what extent the reality is, but perception definitely counts a lot. So this is what he did. I mean, what he said was, I'm leaving it behind. That means that he does believe that there was a conspiracy and his government was toppled with the help of the USA, with the local collaborators. But he believes that now he would like to leave it behind, because right now he has emerged as a popular leader, and he definitely believes that he can win the elections whenever they're held. And if he comes into power, then I think
Right,
he
absolutely. And
should be.
Javed sir, that's an interesting point that you have raised, considering that he has, of course, not denied it completely and just said that he has put it behind him. And Farooq, we've seen that it seems that the PTI chairman seems to be tapering us off from this entire narrative. And because of that, do you think there's also a possibility that perhaps the denial isn't there now, but we will see it in the future?
Right, Sana, the answer to that actually lies not in the what, but in why, right? Yesterday also we were debating what exactly happened. Why is it that he has actually taken this about turn? And there are three very interesting theories. The first one is, of course, related to a purported meeting, and there is some interesting development on that as well. That media claimed or pundits claimed that he might have met the army chief day before yesterday in Lahore. Then Salman Masood, a senior journalist, reports for New York Times, actually stepped forward and said that a senior army official has confided that no such meeting did take place. So that theory is out of the window. The second one, the one that I presented to you, that Trumpian world order or arguments received a shellacking in US midterms. That's why perhaps he has corrected his point of view. Then Najam Sethi, a senior editor, an institution in himself, actually said something very interesting. Yesterday he said that his Imran Khan's two sons actually arrived, and after that there has been a correction, right? This is quite interesting, because he was suggesting that somebody actually conveyed the message. I do agree with one thing though, that arrival of sons after the father has been shot must have had an impact. And I think at this moment, if you have seen the two gentlemen, young gentlemen, I mean, they have been raised really well. And that is also, that goes out as a praise to the mother, who has repeatedly proven how loyal she is to her ex-husband, because remember when there was an audit for the house and property,
Yes.
and she actually pieced together all the money trail and saved Imran Khan Saab's candidature. So I think that these guys are actual stakeholders in the person or individual that we call Imran Khan. So perhaps there must have been some heart to heart, and I see that as well. But whatever it is, the narrative hasn't changed only for the international audience. If you listen to Imran Khan Saab's speech today, there too he has actually mentioned, he has focused more on economics, although his economic message needs some fine tuning. Usually you are supposed to play on the, popular grief rather than actually giving your entire manifesto in your speech. But that aside, I think that there has been a correction. And in the longer run, short run, I don't know, in the long run, it is going to help him.
Yeah,
Right.
Sana, I wanted to go towards obviously Dr. Niaz. Dr. Niaz, if being a journalist, obviously, if I talk about earlier this year, January, February, whoever I came across, obviously they talked about inflation and the government was not in the good books. If I say out of 10, only one person would have been seen as someone who still might associate himself that he will vote for PTI, but at that time 90% of the population, they were not happy with the government at that time. Of course, poor administration is one of the factor, inflation is another. Whatever the reason it was, then obviously they were saying at that time that of course Imran always boasted about having a very capable team which they could not see around within 3 years of that time. Can we say that at that time when it was all happening, the only narrative they came up with was obviously anti-America narrative, so to get bit of favor back from the people? And if this is the case, do you think that the current government was successful enough to penetrate that narrative, that telling to people at large that they were failing to administer in Pakistan, they were failing to control the inflation, that's why they came up with this? So we couldn't see that kind of counter narrative coming out. Do you think that they still need to push forward this counter narrative to people of Pakistan, and still I think they need to reach out to people in the grassroots level, sir?
Well, the problem with interpreting things like this is that, you don't have very hard data available for the situation in Pakistan, like, grassroots surveys about people's perception and so on, to what extent they are, taking all this seriously. There is, of course, the fact that, he does seem to have, regained some of his popularity. To what extent, that again is not known. But then the question is, whatever extent he has regained it, is it primarily because of, this US conspiracy theory, or is it more because of the fact that he's no longer in government and there's another government in power now, and inflation has gone up even further under that new government? So all that is a bit tricky, hard to say. I do remember initially, there was a survey which suggested that people did not buy the US conspiracy theory very seriously. And, the focus is much more on inflation. I mean, if you look at it logically, if you don't like a government, you're not satisfied with its performance, you wouldn't just start liking it because of the fact that it was, kicked out. Even if by a conspiracy, you would look more at, the hard performance and how things are being affected in your life. So my theory, and this is again a theory because I don't have hard data, is that, it's more about inflation and how things are impacting people. And or even that doesn't necessarily change people's loyalties, because, political opinions in Pakistan are almost like religious opinions. They change very slowly. What really happens, especially in, by-elections, is that, first of all, the turnout is very low. And what happens is that, if people are grumpy with the government, with the PMLN because of inflation, they may not change their basic loyalty, but they may not take the trouble to come out and vote for the government just as a sign of anger. And because
Right.
they feel this is just, a by-election. But when it's a full election, a general election, things are very difficult. So, trying to project from by-elections to general elections is like trying to, project from a T20 series to a test series. Because in a
Right.
T20 series, the effort is low, and even a weak team can defeat a strong team. But a
Right,
test match is
absolutely. Dr.
a
Niaz, we'll,
very
we'll take a short break here and we'll be back and continue the discussion. Welcome back to the debate. We'll continue our discussion on what is happening within the political dynamics of the country, especially with reference to what the PTI leadership and PTI chairman seems to be planning. Mr. Javed Saab, considering, of course, that we have this statement now, And of course, perhaps when we move forward, this may be something that will no longer be something required by the PTI leadership to enjoy the kind of popularity that they have now, since they've gained it already. But in terms of moving forward, what sort of strategy or plan of action do you think exists? There are, of course, question marks on the Long March, its objectives, and how it's going to evolve. Mr. Khan, of course, keeps on reiterating the fact that he will be joining the culmination of this march in Rawalpindi, but at the end of the day, when exactly will that happen is still now a question mark. We're midway in November, and then moving forward, there's so many other possibilities that seem to be going on in terms of any backdoor channels or dialogue that exists. So what sort of plan of action do you think is going to be now in the best interests of PTI?
Sana, not even in the past, no political leader, opposition political leader, was able to force early elections or whatever demands it took to Islamabad. We have seen many marchers laying siege to the capital, and ultimately they had to leave. Even the Dharna in Islamabad in 2014 ended the way it ended, and we know that how it ended. So I think Imran does believe that he's not going to get the elections if he goes marching towards the capital and lays siege. Ultimately, there would be a fatigue element. Winter is coming; it is in the offing. People won't be staying for a longer time around the federal capital, and ultimately, if it fizzles out, then I think that would be the last kind of attempt to force elections. And now, when he does believe that he can't sort of achieve that particular goal by marching towards the federal capital, I believe this is what I believe, that probably is looking for an opportunity that when there's a new man in Pindi, there's a new army chief who is appointed, and probably because of this political turmoil and a lot of criticism which went towards the armed forces and the national institutions and the security establishment, the new person, the new army chief would not be indulging in politics, because this is what he believes. And he might be interfering as far as the political turmoil is concerned. He might force the government and ask the government to go for the early elections, to announce the date of the elections, and then he would be able to say that, well, this is what I wanted, I've achieved that, I've got the date. This is all assumption. This is all, whatever he is planning now is entirely based on one single assumption, that when there's a new army chief, he might be able to get some kind of a mileage from him.
Right.
But nobody
Absolutely,
knows what's
Javed
going to
Jadun sahab,
happen.
that is a very good point. Let me ask you one thing. You and I have both been covering, defense beat for quite some time, and we know that every time a new army chief has to be appointed, things go crazy, sir. Somehow it seems that our political landscape, goes topsy-turvy, and everything seems to be unfixed or unhinged. Is it not right at this moment to ask our legislative body, in consultation with army or armed forces, to actually lay down some kind of amendment that ensures that the senior most general, whosoever it is at that time, actually automatically becomes army chief?
As the situation stands now, as far as the Constitution of Pakistan is concerned, it is the prerogative of the Prime Minister of Pakistan
True.
to decide about one general among the list which is sent from the GSU to the Ministry of Defense, and then it is sent to the Prime Minister's office, and Prime Minister has the prerogative to decide as far as the situation stands today. We are talking about the kind of amendment which I believe is going to be a very controversial amendment. Not many political parties would be siding with this particular amendment, because
Why?
if they do that, then the Prime Minister
Why?
loses his prerogative to appoint the army chief, and like the Supreme Court of Pakistan, army would be able to decide about a general, and then he would
No,
be
no, hang on,
appointing
hang
the
on, hang
next
on.
army
Hang
chief.
on, sir. The army, the prime minister also does not actually appoint
Exactly.
the chief justice of Pakistan. So what is the big
Yes.
deal? Another
No, but I
institution
think there's a Farag,
continues
there's a
on its own
difference.
merit.
There's a difference between the appointment of the Chief Justice of Pakistan and the appointment of the Chief of Army Staff, because of because of the clout and the power it sort of exerts in Pakistan. We all
But
know
Javed
that
Sahab, if
the
it's
kind
going
of
to be on
interference we
merit,
had
what
in the
difference
past
would
as
it
well.
make?
Difference, I mean,
It's still
difference,
going to be out
the
of the
that
people
the
who are on
balance,
merit anyway.
uh,
It's just the institution who's
Sana,
appointing the
Sana,
senior most.
Sana,
Yes.
I think the political leadership would believe that the balance of power would heavily tilt in favor of the military, and military would be able to have whatever they want to have. I think this is the kind of a tipping point,
Just on the
and
basis of being
I
able to
don't
appoint their
see
own army chief?
that
No,
happening. Though they
How?
could be
I
pros
don't
and cons
understand.
as far as this decision or the amendment is concerned.
no, no,
I
sir.
strongly
Let
believe
me
that it could
actually,
be.
before we take this to Dr. Saab as well, this question with your permission, Sana, let me actually go back to the whole proposal that has been actually presented at many places. That at the time of retirement, whosoever is senior most automatically gets the post. Dr. Saab, do you think that there is any harm in it? Because then it is time itself that is deciding who is going to be the senior most and who becomes army chief, rather than us playing dice.
Farooq, if you give me just 2 seconds before you go
Yes,
to Dr. Saab, if you
yes, sir.
ask my opinion, I think this is the best way forward, because this way, as you given the example of the appointment of the Chief Justice, this
Yeah,
would definitely resolve all the disputes and all the issues, all the wrangling, and ultimately the dust will settle down. This is my personal opinion.
right.
Right, Dr. Niaz, your take on that?
Well, there's a fundamental difference between the Chief Justice and the Chief of Army Staff, which is that the Supreme Court is an independent institution which is not subservient to the government. And as with other independent institutions like ECP, you don't want to, give too much authority solely to the Prime Minister on that. So either you have the discussion modality between opposition leader and prime minister for election commission, or for the Supreme Court you just have the automatic seniority principle. But that is not true for the chief of the army staff. It's a
Dr.
subservient
Saab, I love the
institution.
theory. I love the
It's a
theory. But can we
subservient
also
institution
talk about the
which,
practical side of
give
things,
some
objective
leeway
reality?
to the chief executive of the country in terms of having some decision making power on who becomes chief of the army staff. And then we must also remember that this is the first time that this thing has been made so controversial. In the past we never had this kind of controversy over the appointment. So just because of the controversy on one point, because of one particular politician, I don't think we should try to make these kind of rules. I think the current thing is fine. The prime minister should have the right, the authority to appoint somebody suitable from five or six generals. And even with the Supreme Court, there is a move now that the seniority principle is not right. There should be a merit-based one, and that debate is still going on. So I would not support this kind of a rule of this
Right.
appointing
Dr.
a
Niaz,
Very,
Dr. Niaz,
very
do you
quickly,
think, Dr. Niaz?
let me just,
Yeah.
just to counter this argument. Sir, you are saying that this time it was controversy, but I remember General Sharif's time, even appointment of the incumbent, even before that, when General Kani was, his first term was ending, suddenly we saw that MNAs started getting disqualified based on fake degrees. So, sir, we can actually keep our headspace in this theoretical world where everything is hunky dory on paper, or we can address the reality on ground. That on one side, Mian Nawaz Sharif tried to sack or change an army chief, and then there was a military takeover.
And
So why do we insist on carrying a weight that is too onerous for anybody at this
And,
moment?
and Dr. Niaz, do you think that this time around the things would have been very smooth, but it's just because of the opposition party pushing it too much, that's why it is getting controversial?
Yeah, I think that is the point. It's just politics by, the opposition leader. I think the basic change that we should make is to do away with, this extension business. I don't think
Yeah,
anybody should get
agreed.
extension, and they should have a firm rule. But in terms of, the appointment, I think as with any appointment of any chief secretary, which I think is an equivalent position, any departmental head, the prime minister should have some leeway, and I would be in support of, having that
All right.
leeway.
Thank you very
Obviously,
much, Dr.
I mean,
Niaz Murtaza and Javed Jadoonsa for joining us. But at least
Thank you.
we're talking about some change, and we hope that we see it soon as well. We'll take a short break here and go back to our next segment. Welcome back to the debate, and we're going to be talking about our next segment, which focuses on the climate change financing for countries like Pakistan. But very quickly, just because we're talking about some very important issues right before the break, Farooq, your take on the fact that when we take a look at the Army Chief's appointment, what sort of factors do you think would be most important, especially in terms of the kind of mechanisms we were earlier proposing?
Right. At this moment, Sana, it is very important to understand how seniority works in the army, right? It is not like seniority in media that if I hang around for long enough, I'm on a conveyor belt of time and I keep on aging. All of a sudden, I'm a senior journalist. It is, every posting, every, upgrade in army, right? Every time it happens on severe method. It is so exhaustive a process that you have to, because of course, one of the reasons is that it has been the pivot of power in Pakistan, right? So all these journals, especially, I do understand that our media pundits and our politicians do like to play favorites. But if you look at the, CVs of all the journals who are there, and that's why it is so confusing, they all are really exceptional officers. So the easiest thing to me would be define a cutoff date, and whosoever actually comes up next automatically gets the baton.
Right.
And then, of course, no extensions and no, secondary means like vice chief or something else.
Right.
If you have that 3-year term, stay true to that, and that way method actually flourishes.
Absolutely. Moving on now to our next segment, which is going to focus on the COP27's decision for a global shield, which is of course extremely important for countries like Pakistan, who are very concerned about loss and damage, and bringing in the kind of money that is needed to deal with disasters such as the one that we are still trying to recover from. Faisal, this is an important development, and perhaps another victory after the fact that this conversation was part of the agenda at the COP27 summit. But there is, of course, a lot of question marks that still remain in terms of how exactly we're going to go about it. But even so, when we look at this particular development in terms of Pakistan and 6 other countries, how hopeful are you that we're going to see some sort of action very soon? Because A, they're talking about immediate action after the COP27, and B, in terms of the kind of distribution mechanism that is going to be evolved for countries to actually use this infrastructure and go ahead with the kind of commitments that they make on such summit.
Sana, very good question. And since I have visited Balochistan and Sindh, obviously since that day I have been constantly thinking about it, that of course world must come forward to help out Pakistan, because this flooding, it had obviously nothing to do with Pakistan. Climate change is a global phenomenon, and if we talk about Pakistan, Pakistan is one of the most responsible countries when it comes to carbon emissions, and it has given its 100%. And at the same time, I think it was responsibility of the bigger economies to, of course, help out Pakistan and countries who are of the same nature as Pakistan. 7 of the countries, they will be helped out, and of course the big economies of the world, G20, the one we call it, they will make sure that the climate justice is carried out. How it gets carried out in the coming days, of course we will see it, but in recent times, of course, the narratives which we were getting and the statements which we were getting from the bigger countries saying that, oh, how we can give money straight away, maybe Pakistan use this money to cover its expenses on the loans it has from the other world. Here we must understand one thing, that since the flooding up till now, whatever the amounts they have been reaching to Pakistan from the friends of Pakistan, they have been spent on people. Of course, there are almost 30 million people who are affected by it, and somehow if Pakistan is coping with this disaster, that is just because of one reason, that Pakistan has been spending money on them people. And someone who has been to places, and I know that the armed forces and the local administration, they have been putting up excellent work to, of course, help out people out there. To me, I think Army is the best institution. Army has all the surveys as well. Who lost what, they know it from the ground, straight from the ground they know it. And of course, when the distributions are being made possible, they're the best people to contact, and they have the ground structures as well to reach out to people. To me, I think they can play a pivotal role when it comes to making it show that all of the data which is required by the G20 countries, whenever they want it, it
Right.
can be presented to them.
Right, and that of course may be valid, but in terms of the kind of aspects that you have pointed out, Faisal, it seems that there will be a lot of time in terms of actually devising a way forward of this particular financing infrastructure, and I'm concerned about those factors.
Time as well as the trust
Right.
deficit amongst the countries, that should not exist.
Sure, but of course the decision has been there in terms of supporting Pakistan and 6 other nations. So when we take a look, Farokh, at the global shield that has been put forward as a way to support these countries, I want to understand in terms of how exactly will there be enough data in terms of building the kind of help or requirement or the infrastructure to go ahead with actually providing this channel for countries to help the other countries. And because we're looking at a timeline which says that it's going to start immediately after the COP27, does that mean that they're going to start work on it, or does that mean that we'll be seeing money trickling in? And also in terms of the kind of issues that were earlier pointed out, because of the loss and damage issues.
I have to take notes now. Yeah,
Right.
go ahead.
So,
Yeah.
because of the loss and damage issues that have earlier been pointed out, how exactly will all of those concerns be immediately be dealt with under this particular global shield? Because there were commitments earlier, but nobody has really had developed any sort of a way to ensure that it does happen.
Right, and this is a.
And I hope you got all of that.
This is. I've actually noted
Great.
it down. So first part is, of course, how soon the money might be available, and the second one, of course, is about the modalities. Before I address both these issues, let me actually, because Faisal actually pointed out, reminded you that he has been to flood-affected areas. Let me remind everybody who is watching that I am a climate change victim myself. My own village is underwater as we speak. My own father's grave, we have these traditional values that graves are very important. That too is underwater as we speak, right? So I know what loss is and how badly it has affected people on ground. Now, a couple of kind words regarding COP27. We kept on saying that we don't know whether it is going to pull its weight or whether it is going to be yet another cop-out. So finally, Sana, this global shield has actually proven that it is not a cop-out and that world leaders are ready to stand up. One country merits special praise, that is Germany. Germany has been through a lot. Recently, there were floods in Germany as well. And I think Germany has risen to the occasion. They have contributed the seed money worth 170 million euros, right? It might not be that big compared to the kind of billions we keep on talking about, but it is an important amount given that every government in democracies has to actually first, before pledging any amount, has to go to the parliament and seek approval, which includes opposition and some of the outliers as well, who actually can spoil any time. So that said, I think that once this global shield has been instituted, and remember COP27 comes under the UN system, right? So whatever initiative there's going to be, the trust is not the issue at all, because it will be under the transparency of UN systems, right? Now the structures and how exactly is it going to be dispatched, and then of course loss and damages. I think it was another big victory. If you remember, in the past there was already, thanks to COP21, that is Paris Accord, since then there was already a provision of fiscal support for climate change and then capacity building, right? But loss and damages was not included. And this time it was, and my question repeatedly to you was, what has changed? And number one on the long list of countries that were considered is Pakistan, our floods, right? Because of that it was included. And this time, because of this global shield and this announcement that it is going to be a substantial portion is going to be coming to Pakistan as well, that proves what? That this time loss and damages has also been included.
Right.
Now, let me agree with Faisal about domestic transparency as well. I think we are miracle workers when it comes to Pakistan. The only problem is we all work in silos. Army is doing its own job. Bureaucracy will do its own job. Private sector or the charity organizations will do their own job, and they will not connect. And because money comes from various silos, it becomes a problem because a lot of it falls through the cracks.
Right.
So what you need is that dashboard that the Prime Minister refused to actually approve, and now I hope that we have a more dynamic one, because everyone who is going to pledge any amount to Pakistan needs transparency, and people of Pakistan in whose name the money will come also need transparency.
Absolutely, and we're glad that we're on the right track. Yes, Faisal.
Yeah. Sana, here we must not forget the visit of Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and we should never forget you, Sana, because you interviewed him, and obviously that interview was an excellent interview, and it helped people across the globe to know what it is actually going on.
Absolutely, and thank you for that.
No,
I was glad of
let
the
me
opportunity.
actually,
Yes.
do you have anything against praises?
So
that was, as a colleague of yours, that was a proud moment, because
it was
the Secretary Guterres is a great man, and
Yes,
it was
indeed.
a great interview.
Indeed, absolutely. And I remember posting about it in my interaction with him, that his faith in humanity rekindled mine. So it was great to interact with him, and it was a wonderful opportunity. And we're all very, very grateful for his support to Pakistan with regards to climate change justice. And he has a lot to contribute to what we're seeing right now in terms of the Global Shield. That's all that we have from the debate. Thank you, Farouk. Thank you, Faisal, for joining us and talking to us about these very important issues. And we hope only the best things for Pakistan, and we hope that they come soon. That's all from the debate. See you tomorrow.